defeat Russia first, isolate Iran, which also, by the way, degrades their ability to support Hezbollah, the Hamas, and Houthis. I mean, Iran honestly has been looking, I would say, weak and rather ineffective over the last several weeks, and now it's really going to be exposed. Of course, you can almost understand why the regime felt they had to do something. Otherwise, all of their proxies would doubt that Iran would do anything to protect them. And so the Iranian strike was significant in terms of the types of weapons that they launched, and more got through this time, obviously, than back in April. But all in all, not very effective. And I think they probably will pay a pretty significant price for doing this. Well, I think that we have consistently overrated what they have because they do have a lot of capabilities. They do these big parades and all that sort of thing, but that does not equal having an effective military. Um, so I don't think that they want. I don't think they want to get into a full scale conflict with Israel, but it may not be their choice. And of course, what's happening in this situation is connected to what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, Iran has one friend in the world, and that's Russia, which is why they have been supplying Russia with drones and missiles and other support. Now, that will make it, I think it may be a little bit more difficult for Iran to provide meaningful weapons to Russia if they end up in a conflict. And by the same token, if Ukraine defeats Russia, it would lead to further isolation of Iran. So here's an opportunity for us to think and act strategically by connecting these two theaters. Of course, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. My president did say yesterday that no, the United States would not support Israel striking Iranian nuclear plants. I don't know how much would be required, or if Israel could do that by themselves. Maybe they could, but the Israelis also have not been asking for permission a lot lately because they worry that information gets leaked out from the U.S. Or that we are tapping the brakes on them the way we do on Ukraine. So I don't think Israel will ask for permission to do what they're doing. The fact that it looks like they might have attacked a Russian airbase in Syria, or at least close to it. That's also an interesting choice of targets. But Syria is the portal through which Iran provides capabilities to Hezbollah. So it makes sense that Israel would try to strike that part of the supply chain as well. I think this could disrupt some of Iran's support to Russia, and if it also puts the Kremlin in a difficult situation in that they support Iran, but they also have managed to keep. I mean, Israel has not come out strongly in support of Ukraine, and so now I think that the Kremlin will be thinking through how do they continue to try and straddle the fence on this. I imagine at the end of the day, if we are acting strategically, that it will be to the benefit of Ukraine and Israel if Russia firmly supports Iran in this, and that and then as Israel continues to damage Iran, that has positive effects, I think, for Ukraine. But we need to think it all the way through. This clearly is what I think we should be wanting. That this is our strategic objective: defeat Russia first, isolate Iran, which also, by the way, degrades their ability to support Hezbollah, the Hamas, and Houthis. And this also would send a powerful message to China that the West does have the political will as well as industrial capacity and military capability to do all these things. But so far, it feels a little bit like we treat these as completely separate, unrelated events. You know, you have the U.S. And also the Royal Air Force supporting Israel, knocking down missiles in Israeli airspace, and knocking down Houthi missiles over the Red Sea. why do we not do this with Ukraine? Well, I look at Iran. Almost all of the terrorist activity that happens in the Middle East is sponsored by either Iran and or Russia. I mean, they are at they're part of the problem in almost most of the bad things that are going on. Stand fast the fact that Israel has got to change their approach to Gaza and get back on track with the two-state solution. But in terms of who's supporting the bad guys, most of it comes out of Iran. And my sense is that about probably 80% of the Iranian population absolutely hates the regime. I thought 2 years ago when this women's uprising, I really thought that was going to lead to something, but I think we all kind of stood on the sidelines, hoping it turned out well for them, but not actually doing anything. And I don't. The United States has a bad track record when it comes to regime change, but I think that we should look at this as: is there opportunity now? Um, if we think all the way through on how this could turn out, what would be the benefits in the region if the Ayatollah and his regime were no longer in power because the Iranian people finally had enough. Um, it seems like there's potential for that. That's not something that the United States should overtly be trying to bring about, but I would not recommend that we tell Israel what they cannot do. Yeah, I think that the last 2 weeks, it feels like there's unfortunately this kind of a slow sort of slide towards the United States and European countries and UK. Um, the sincere no, not sincerity, the depth and the intensity of our support for Ukraine seems to be waning. I keep seeing articles that have ridiculous headlines, like what was even in FT this morning about this strategically important city of Vuhledar. uh, the Ukrainians never said it was strategic, but this is, I think poor journalism actually when people are describing every little town in Ukraine as strategically vital. If that's true, that means if you lose that town, you lose the war. But yet, after 10 and a half years, Ukraine still controls more than 80% of its country. And Russian forces have moved about 50 kilometers in the last 7 months. So 50 kilometers, that's 30 miles in the last 7 months at the cost of tens of thousands of casualties. And so it shows me that the Russians absolutely cannot overrun Ukrainian forces. They can kill lots of them. They can kill civilians bombing these towns, but from a purely military standpoint, they lack the ability to knock Ukraine out of the war. So the only hope for the Russians is that we quit, that we get tired. And when I see these headlines about, oh, we are losing and this nonsense, this is pure oxygen for the Kremlin, because the Kremlin sees that the U.S. here in the last few months of the Biden administration looks to be kind of softening. And of course, if it's a Trump administration next, it'll definitely be worse. And I don't see how anybody who knows Russia, who watches what the Russians do, I'm sure you saw the video from yesterday where 16 soldiers were lined up and shot. This is same as Bucha. I mean, this is who they are. Why in the hell should Ukraine be pressed to negotiate with somebody like that who's never going to live up to it, never has? I think we need to understand the impact of if Ukraine fails, and it'll be our fault. What kind of price that Europe will pay and that we will pay, and the Chinese, of course, will walk away from this with a view that the West really does lack the courage and the political will to stand up to this kind of aggression. Yeah. Well, he is the president up until January the 20th. Whoever wins the election, President Biden is the president. Um, and I think he could certainly make some policy changes that would allow them to, for example, use weapons against targets inside Russia. But I think the administration at this point is really dug in on it. They have no intention of changing. I spoke to a couple of administration officials here this past weekend at the Warsaw Security Forum, or this week, and unfortunately, I don't see it changing. Both out of the excessive fear that Russia might somehow escalate, which nobody else believes will happen, um, but also I think they're worried about anything that could somehow affect the election here in the last 32 days or so. So I mean, so, like shutting off Russia's ability to export oil to India and China. That's what pays Russia's. That's how Russia stays in the war, is because of selling this oil and gas. And the administration is unwilling to take tough steps to stop it because that could have an effect on gas prices, which was in the front of mind of millions of American voters is inflation. So this is this is not unique, but it certainly is unfortunate that because we didn't make good decisions, strategic decisions years ago about helping Ukraine defeat Russia, we now are in a situation where it's much more difficult to even make these adjustments because the election is going to be so close, unfortunately.